I had to teach the U.S. Constitution for the first time, and I'm thinking, how am I going to make the U.S. Constitution sexy to 11th and 12th graders? So several of the kids had talked to me about getting in trouble with the law, and I said, well, might as well start there. So they complained all period about the fact of the cops hassling them when it wasn't even curfew, and just moaned and groaned, and I finally stopped and said, okay, kids, I want you to do two things. Can you do this for me? We don't know. First thing, you have to be polite. You can't cuss. You can't say anything rude. You got to be polite. And the second thing is when the policeman hassles you, you say, "What is your badge number?" Well, the class erupted. "Oh, Mrs. Massie, you haven't been hassled. You don't know what it's like out there." And I said, "Kids, you got to try it at least." One person raised their hand and said, "Mrs. Massie, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but you're an old white woman, and you don't know what it's really like out there." Class bell rang, and I said, "At least try it." Now, for those of you that have been teachers, you know what happened the next day never happens, but it did. Class bell rings. The smallest kid in my class comes running in, raising her hand, going, Mrs. Massie, you were right." Dead silence in the classroom. I was right. Enjoy that moment, right? And she said, "Guess what happened? We were at the park yesterday. I was with my friends, and a cop came over and started hassling us, and it wasn't curfew." So, Mrs. Massie, I stood up, 4'10", stood up, and I went to the policeman. I was very polite, and I said, "What is your badge number?" And my friends looked at me as if I'd flown in from outer space, said, "Why are you asking him that?" "Because Mrs. Massie told me to." Well, the cop kept on hassling them. So she asked a second time, "What is your badge number?" By this time, the friend's eyes are this big, except the cop turned and started to walk away. Well, she wasn't going to let a good thing die. She ran after him and asked a third time, "What is your badge number?" And he got in his car and went away. Well, suddenly, 20 pairs of eyes are glued on me. Why did that happen? And I said, because if people know you know your rights, they treat you differently. Now, you might say, well, I'm not their age. I'm not in the same situation. I passed my civics class. I vote. I elect people who are to take care of the Constitution. But what happens if they start playing political football with it? Use it or lose it. Look at that statistic. Look at that real carefully. Woodrow Wilson Institute has done a study of how many of us citizens, not students, how many of us citizens could pass the citizens exam that people who are not citizens of this country take to become citizens. 36% would pass. 36%, which means that we're susceptible to people who want to play political football with the Constitution. Now, how do they do this? Well, it's called, if some of you watch football, it's called the misdirection play in football. The quarterback gets under center. You have the offensive line there and the defensive line there. Hike. Everybody starts going to the right. And the one thing the quarterback tries to do, so no one's looking, is hand the football off. So the halfback takes it, and you hope everybody goes this way while the halfback runs that way. The misdirection play. You hope you're not watching the person with the ball. I'd like to give 3 examples of how the misdirection play is misused with the Constitution by our 3 branches of government. Let's first look at the President Executive Order. Now, I don't know about you, it does not matter what party you are. Whenever a president comes into office, they think they can just issue executive orders. And they will tell you, quote from the Constitution, the executive power is vested in the President of the United States. Anytime you question an executive order, they will say that. I'm the executive, I can pass them. But it's a misdirection play. Misdirection play. Why? Because this is also in the Constitution. He shall take care that the laws are faithfully executed. Now listen to the language. It is not legal language. Take care to faithfully execute. The president has to take care to faithfully execute the laws of Congress. Not what the president wants to do, it's congressional law. Now, I don't know about you what your position is on climate change, but our last two presidents have done diametrically opposed executive orders. One of them's not right. But both of them say that the executive has the power. That's why we have to know that in the Constitution is to take care to faithfully execute. Now, the second example, Supreme Court nominees. Recently we had a nominee to the Supreme Court. And one of the members of the Senate said, let the people decide. Now, you hear that, and doesn't it sound nice? We're a democracy. Shouldn't the people decide? It's a misdirection play. Why is it a misdirection play? For two reasons. One, when the founders were writing the Constitution, they looked at all different ways for the Supreme Court nominees to be nominated. And the one they refused to look at was the people to do it. Why? Because it's too complicated, they felt. There are too many different factors in someone being a judge that the people are just not appropriate to judge. But the second reason is that the Senate was only given two powers when it came to Supreme Court nominees: advise and consent. I dare you to find weight in there. Advise, hold committee holdings, and consent, have a vote. We need to take back the Constitution. Now let's look at the third example. This is a former Supreme Court justice would go around saying to whoever he could, the word privacy is not in the Constitution. The word privacy is not in the Constitution. And he's right. But it's a misdirection play again. Why? Because while the word privacy is not in the Constitution, the definition is. The rights of persons to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects. 4 different areas. We have that right to privacy. Now you think, in this day and age, why do we need to know that? And I'd say there's one word that will sum it up. One word: Band-Aid. Now maybe many of you are not as old as I am, but when I was younger, a Band-Aid meant you had a boo-boo. And you went to your mommy with the boo-boo crying hysterically. She got that Band-Aid out, wrapped it around your finger, and suddenly it was all well. Well, folks, then I got a little older, and I went in to buy a laptop. And I got all the things for the laptop, and then the person who sold it to me said, "Do you have your Band-Aid?" Band-Aid for a laptop? He said, "Well, unless you want somebody watching you, you better put a Band-Aid over the camera." We need to use it or lose it, folks. 64% of us citizens could not pass that exam. 64%. And that's when misdirection plays can work, if we don't know what the Constitution is. So how might we recover it? Talk about it. Carry it in your purse, in your pocket. Talk about it. It used to be all the time the Constitution was talked about. If you read old newspapers, all the time the constitutional issues were raised. Not now. Wear a pin. People love to have flags. Why not the Constitution? Small thing, but a reminder. Small thing, but a reminder. A third thing we can do, might sound stupid, but I think there's some merit to it. Write your state legislatures and say if anybody runs for federal office, Congress or president, they have to take the citizens exam. It gets better. They have to have the results notarized. And they have to be published for you to see. Now, what's the purpose behind that? One, if they pass it and still mess around with the Constitution, you know it. And if they don't know it, you know it. And finally, have the media. They love to, take control. How many lies were said? How many facts were misrepresented? How about we have another category for questionable constitutional interpretations, constantly reminding us that our U.S. Constitution is being abused? We need to use it or lose it. Thank you.